I thought I will do this as a demo, and other people I would help to set up the actual news platforms. But as it happened, this became for me slowly a platform which developed more and more. So Newsclick wanted to cover these issues, governance movements, and also give voice to those who are normally not heard in the big media. So that was the agenda which we had, and obviously it was not an agenda which this government liked. See, nobody gives us anything. We have to fight for it, and it's a much larger social struggle that has to get this issue to the people, that unless they fight for independent media and independent voices to come to them.
Today we have Newsclick founder-editor Prabir Purkayastha with us. We are having a conversation with him. He is in Thrissur. Welcome, sir. My first question is about Newsclick itself. I remember you saying you started Newsclick in 2009 while you were entirely in a different profession, and you are a social activist, and then you turned to be a founder of a news website. Can you tell us in detail about how did this journey started?
I've been an engineer, as I have said a number of times. I'm also a science activist, been involved in the free software movement as well. Question before me was that when I realized that with the new media coming into existence, essentially web-based platforms, that the whole scenario of news was going to change. Particularly your generation, my son's generation, they are not going to read newspapers or see television because they will see most of the information they want, the news they want from their cell phone, mobile phones. So therefore I wanted to show that web-based platforms can be done cheaply, can be done in a way that small groups can also start such ventures, and this is the way forward for a lot of us who otherwise could not do anything with news because it's too expensive as a platform. You need a satellite television channel, you need a huge infrastructure for newspapers, of course you need printing presses. So I thought that this opened a window by which you could actually do news in a way small groups could also enter. And because I come from a profession which deals with information technology, computers and so on, I also thought that I had the expertise to create such platforms cheaply. So my effort really was to show as an example how this could be done and how news platforms could be created with a much lower cost than what people expected, and the internet provided for us an opportunity. I thought I will do this as a demo, and other people I would help to set up the actual news platforms. But as it happened, this became for me slowly a platform which developed more and more. And therefore Newsclick, which was supposed to be a demo for others, became a news platform itself.
Okay. So now there are a lot of independent alternate news platforms. And at the same time, I think there is also a monopoly of news within the Indian news itself. I mean the news agencies that provide news in a certain prejudiced manner, to say, or it doesn't keep informed about certain issues.
See, very simply, monopolies have always existed in news platforms, whether it's international or national. So big media is the natural, quote unquote, the natural scenario. Occasionally windows appear where you can make breakthroughs, and that is when technology changes, which is one of the conjunctures, such time that we are seeing or we were seeing earlier. Now, of course, that window is almost closing, because if you see, ultimately it's YouTube and Facebook which controls these platforms as well. Most of our viewers we reach through either YouTube or Facebook. So it's not an independent of big platforms either. But old news platforms, which are monopolies, they have given way to a lot of small groups creating news, and particularly what is called influencers today, also being able to create a space for themselves. So this is the change that is taking place. It's not going to change the structure of media, that the money, which is advertisements, would still go to a handful of groups, either news groups or platforms like YouTube or Facebook. But for a lot of us, it means that a window of opportunity exists by which we can get our views, or particularly the way we want news to be covered, also carried. And the way we want news to be covered, particularly in the case of Newsclick, was to cover what the people are saying about their problems, the movements are doing, what are they saying, covering their issues, because that is not what big media today in India covers. They really, if there is a strike or there's a march of the workers in the streets, they will say it creates traffic jams. So the viewpoint is that of a person using the car facing a traffic jam because the workers are on the streets, not what is the problem the workers are facing. Of course, the farmers' movement was another classic example of that as well. So Newsclick wanted to cover these issues, governance movements, and also give voice to those who are normally not heard in the big media. So that was the agenda which we had, and obviously it was not an agenda which this government liked.
Another question I have is, how dependent is these independent news platforms are on these on the social media platforms like those owned by Meta? When Twitter was there, we have known that how discriminatory its policies are, and do you think we'll have a phase where we can be independent of these?
Let's be very clear that we have to continuously struggle to find a space for ourselves. Nobody's going to give it to us. And there is no question that as far as the mass media is concerned, those who actually control what is called the last mile, how whatever we do or say reaches finally the audience, they are the ones who generate the monopoly, and they are the ones who get most of the money. So even if there are advertisements, most of the money goes to YouTube and Facebook. It doesn't come to those who create the content. But nevertheless, it still gives us a way of reaching people. And how this will shape up in the future is a much larger battle. I don't think there is an easy answer to the questions.
Okay.
People in the West have been talking about, and some of the countries have been talking about, that YouTube, and which is Google really, and Facebook, which is Meta, have to share the revenue they get with the content creators. And that has to be more equitable. There are anti-monopoly actions being thought of against both Google and Facebook, Meta. So all this we have to see. See, nobody gives us anything. We have to fight for it, and it's a much larger social struggle that has to get this issue to the people, that unless they fight for independent media and independent voices to come to them, this is not going to happen by itself. But this is where alliances of different kinds are involved. That's where the free software movement, for example, or other such movements which exist in the world, the journalists who are in this business, they have to fight for a different information order where these are provided. This is what you and I, or people who are involved in this media, have also to do. But most of all, it's the viewers and the people who listen or people who view news. They have to play their role in order to create the ability of independent media to reach them. So this is a much larger struggle. No easy solutions that you and I can give sitting here.
Yeah.
But it is the key issue today on how we democratize media in general.
The current government, it showcases a very intense mode of operation in terms of how incorporate this environmental destruction at one side and divisive policies on the communal lines on the other side. And when we think about it, it's a more complex question, I understand, but do you think that with this mandate in the election and past years that people still have that ability and access and privileges to fight this government?
I think people always have that. I do not think the governments determine a country's policy by themselves. The people play a role. So that is going to happen. It's also true that when we talk about environmental damage, all of these issues, we are not fighting a government. We are fighting really big corporation and its political power in the country. Will manifest itself through this government or that government, but that is really who we are fighting. So I think the larger picture is really how do we fight for the rights of the people. And the environmental rights are also ultimately people's rights. People's rights to a clean environment, drinking water, energy resource for themselves, cheap energy, all these are issues.
Indigenous rights as well.
Pardon?
Indigenous rights.
Peoples of indigenous people's rights to their resources, which are quite often being taken away from them. So all of these are issues of struggle. And that is something the media has to learn how to report. Unfortunately, big media is too closely aligned with corporate interests, and they're not doing that. And that's why much smaller media, not necessarily ours, because we have at the moment not really able to do what we wanted to do. But a lot of others, I'm sure will take that space. And as I said, all these are battles to be fought in the public realm, in which media is only another space to fight.
Okay. Thank you so much for speaking to us. Good evening.
Thank you.